Welcome to the Safety Break, the Whitewater Rescue Podcast. We're here to share stories of real river accidents and rescues and find expert advice on how to solve the problems you might encounter in the Whitewater River environment. I'm your host, Jack Diddy, an emergency medicine physician, whitewater paddler, and wilderness medicine educator. Together, I hope we can celebrate successful rescues and learn from our mistakes in a supportive environment. If you have a story to share of a non-fatal accident or rescue, send me an email at thesafetybreak@gmail.com or contact me on our Facebook page, The Safety Break. If you like what you hear, hit the subscribe button and follow us on social media. I hope you learned something valuable in the show.
I pulled that stroke coming in to go left, and as soon as I turned and put that right blade in and looked to my right, I just see down in the pit Evan's head, his chin right about water level, and he's kind of like bobbing around like this. You can see he's kind of struggling, but no arms up, nothing like that. And I go through the left slot, I flip. I couldn't even see his boat. No, you couldn't see the boat at all, so I must have gone over it. But I went through the left slot, flipped, rolled up, was like, what? And pretty quickly realized what was going on.
I happened to be in the heart of the gorge Friday, November 3rd, a day before green race, setting up or helping set up and test the live stream for the race. The whole live stream crew was river right at Gorilla, testing out the system, getting things connected. The live stream crew headed up by John Grace in there. And so he had a radio, I had a radio, several others had radios, and we all had radio communication to the live stream trailer at the top of the gorge. And while we were setting everything up, we had a paddler come down to us and say that there was an unresponsive paddler still in his boat in go left. And so we went from immediately working on live stream stuff to, I just had Grace look at me, point to me, say, "Robbie, go." And so I, with my radio, just ran up from river right at Gorilla as fast as I could up to go left. And the whole time not knowing what was happening, what level any sort of rescue was going down. I just knew I needed to get up there and as fast as I could. I had no idea what I was coming up on.
A pin with head down under the water is the worst case scenario for whitewater paddlers. In most cases, the paddler is already a little bit out of breath from whatever exertion led to the pin. And in the best of all worlds, you have a couple of minutes of consciousness to try to work free. Irreversible brain injury sets in just a few minutes after that, in the 5 to 10 minute range for most people. So seconds matter, more so than in any other situation on the river. For rescuers, not only do you have to solve the problem of the pin extrication, but you then also have to move the paddler out of the water, get them into some form of stable position, and start resuscitation efforts if they're not breathing. So for this all to work out successfully, it requires rescuers to be at the right place at the right time. But most importantly, it requires that those rescuers have the right training and experience so they can deploy those skills without hesitation. In this episode, we hear a story of one of these pins, and the fortunate gathering of individuals who happened to be on site that day to execute a quick live bait rescue and drowning resuscitation. These people did not know each other well before the accident. They just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and they each had the exact skill set needed at that moment to save this life. The sense that I got from each of them was that their prior training allowed them to act without hesitation, saving those few precious seconds that led to a successful outcome. As we hear this story, consider your own training and skills, and how you could play this same role for your friends on the river. This incident occurred the day before the Green Narrows race in 2023, as multiple groups of paddlers were on the river, taking their last practice laps before the race. We heard some stories on this podcast last year about a hazardous feature at a rapid called Go Left and Die. That rapid always had a tricky line over a twisting ledge drop and through a narrow slot. But a new rock rolled into the base of the ledge sometime in the spring of that year, creating a bad entrapment hazard, and surprising many of the racers during their training laps in the month leading up to the race. If you dropped off the ledge in the wrong spot with the wrong angle, this rock was in the perfect position to crush the bow of your kayak and trap your legs in the boat. Maybe a dozen or so boats were destroyed by pinning against this thing. Now it's kind of hard to believe that we're talking about this rapid in the past tense, but Go Left and Die is one of the many rapids on the Green Narrows that was completely scrambled and recreated by the Hurricane Helene flood. The drop is still there, but the rock features have been significantly rearranged. So the specific hazard mentioned in this story is long gone, but I'm pretty sure there's some new pin opportunities scattered around there in its place. I recorded the interviews for this story shortly after the incident last year. The editing took a while and I had some other stories to work on, so it sat on the back burner for a while. Then in November of this year, the American Heart Association announced some updates to their CPR guidelines, finally acknowledging in these guidelines the vital role of rescue breathing in drowning resuscitation. This has been long overdue, and the previous lack of emphasis on this has led to a fair bit of confusion for new learners of CPR, and even for CPR instructors and healthcare providers. So I was very glad to see this update, and I felt this was a good time to revisit this CPR topic on the podcast. Back in episodes 2 and 3, we heard a similar resuscitation story and a more in-depth look at CPR for drowning. I'd encourage you to listen back to that as well, but some of those same ideas will be discussed here in this story. Here's Evan Dyer with his story and the truly heroic efforts of those that saved his life.
So yeah, my name is Evan Dyer. I'm 23 years old. I started kayaking when I was about 9 years old, actually on the green. It was my first ever river paddled. So it was a lower green. It's at a sleepaway camp in Tuxedo, North Carolina called Falling Creek Camp. I was kayaking with two guys, Charles Brooks, J.R. Wall. They actually both went to Falling Creek Camp with me. We've been friends for a while, and they were both training for the race too. We were coming in, we were doing, well, I wouldn't call it a hot lap. It's kind of like we split the river into like 3 parts. So we all raced all the way up to right before Go Left. And then we were going to split up into 2 more sections, kind of just to, set safety and make sure we were all good. And then we got to Go Left. And I don't know why I run Go Left a lot without actually setting up safety, but I looked at everybody. I was like, let's get somebody out. Let's get somebody on the river right rock. And JR was like, all right, I can do it. So Charles and I were going to run it, and the plan was for JR to, run it after us and after we set safety for him. So I led the pack. I went first, peeled out off the river at Eddy right after Boofers and hit the boof and went in. And I came in immediately, just boat got pushed way right. And my natural instinct was I threw a huge righty to try to get back left. And it kind of just put my boat like 90 degrees going off the drop into the hole. And it was, it's pretty quick. I feel like I surfed it maybe for like a second. And then it kind of just like my boat got locked up and I was just like stuck, like nothing was moving. Like I was pretty like first little bit, I was kind of freaking out, but after like 5 or 10 seconds, it was kind of like, all right, I'm stuck in here. I pulled my skirt, legs were not moving. Like literally like pulling as hard as I can, trying to like grab rocks around me, grab my boat, pushing out, legs couldn't get out. During all this, there's some ropes hitting me. I was trying to grab them. Like I felt them. I couldn't get my hands on them. I took 2 breaths. There was like, I could really stretch out and get 2 breaths when I was stuck. It was like pretty crappy breaths, to be honest. They were kind of, I would choke on water, but I could like really get up and, get in the bubbles, get some air. That, I don't know if that helped or made it worse from, getting some air, but also choking on some water. But it's a miracle. I don't know. I stayed calm. I don't know exactly how long I was just chilling there holding my breath, but it was like pretty just, Evan, this is it, get out. And there was never a panic. I don't know. It was everybody, talks about how painful it was to, be underwater for so long, but it wasn't. That was the last thing. I just kind of went and I was out.
We next hear from Pete Frazier. Pete was also doing a race training lap that day. He broke his paddle and go left a few minutes before Evan came through, and happened to be hanging out on the right bank just below the rapid, along with a few other people that we'll hear from in a few minutes. Pete's interview was recorded while he was in Mexico a few weeks after the race, recorded from the stairwell of a hostel during a rainstorm. So sorry for the background distraction.
So I'm standing on the bottom right eddy. I watched him come through and flat pin on the rock and go left. Immediately when I saw that, I grabbed my throw bag out of my boat and scurried up around the river right side bank and got to the boulder that is closest on the river right to Evan, who is pinned facing towards river left, and all we can really see is like the top of his helmet. His hands are up in the air. He's obviously let go of his paddle, and it becomes very apparent very quickly that he can't get out of his boat. I remember scurrying up there and taking about 20 feet out of my throw bag, 20 feet of rope out of my bag, instead of throwing the whole bag in there, and throw that end of rope to him, which at this point, his head's underwater, his hands are flailing, and I get that rope right in between his helmet and his left hand, and he essentially makes no effort to grab onto that rope. First thoughts is either it's too turbulent so he can't grab onto it, or he doesn't feel the rope right there. And then in the back of your mind, the third option too is if he is unconscious at this point. We're unsure. Somewhere in this, one of the people who was paddling with him, JR, he had gotten up there on this rock with me too, and he had thrown his rope once or twice as well, and it became apparent that he was not going to be able to grab onto this rope. So very quickly, it was like, we're going to have to live bait him in there, or live bait him out of there. And I immediately got my carabiner out of my PFD and had JR take my rope and tie the knot around my carabiner, hooking it to the back of my live bait rescue vest. And as soon as it was tied, I jumped off of the boulder, kind of just seeing his head. And the water was surging to sometimes you could barely see his face, and then it would surge back to where it was just the top of his helmet, his orange helmet. So I knew exactly where his PFD was, and I remember jumping, and pretty much as I jumped, going like hands straight to the lapels of his PFD.
It's hard to overstate what a heroic move this was. Without any hesitation, Pete risked his life to jump down into a really chaotic cauldron of water and pull Evan out to safety. I think it also shows the clear benefit of his prior swiftwater rescue training to be able to make this quick decision and quickly set up and pull off the live bait rescue.
Grabbing onto his PFD and putting my feet on essentially the cockpit of his kayak and trying to pull him out of the boat. He was stuck in there good enough to where I couldn't pull him out immediately like I thought I was going to be able to. And I start kind of yanking him. So we're looking upstream, and I'm starting to yank him towards my left, which is down the river right slot. And he didn't come out that way, so then I tried pulling him towards the river left slot, and then that didn't work. And eventually, really yanking on him as hard as I can, and we end up pulling him out, and me and him together, we flush down the right side slot into the pool below. There's like a rather large eddy down there, and it's kind of a strong swirling current in there, pulling you back up to the top upstream. And so we flush out, and at this point his helmet is completely over his face with the chin strap kind of up around his neck very tightly. And I remember trying to unbuckle his helmet almost immediately once we're in the pool, and I couldn't unbuckle his helmet. It was so tight, and his helmet being over his face at this point, I just pull his helmet completely forward off of his head. And then we're trying to get him up onto the banks, and I remember being close, like on the rock shelf, probably 3 or 4 feet in the water, having my feet on the rock shelves, and the current ended up pulling me back upstream, so I wasn't able to get him or myself out of the water yet. And once I got pulled back in upstream, that's when like another level of panic really hit in, because immediately I knew he was unconscious when we flushed into the pool. And then ripping his helmet off and seeing his face, then not being able to get out of the water was like a frustrating, scary moment, knowing that we have to be moving quickly. And at this point, Carl is on the shore, and he jumps into the river with me, and Liam Anderson throws Carl a rope, and we end up getting him up onto shore. And this is when Lou and Carl really took over. I helped him get to shore, and then I kind of stepped back a little bit.
Next, we hear from Carl Anderson, who jumped in to help with the next steps of the rescue.
At that point, I think there were 3 people in the pool in kayaks, including myself, and we kind of booked it for the right shore to get out. I got out of my boat, and, people were kind of yelling at that point, and I stashed my boat and was like, where is he? Where is he? I see Pete floating down through the pool, and it looks like they're kind of struggling. I couldn't tell if they still had upstream tension from the belayer who was holding him on live bait, and they were kind of floating towards the upper end of that river right eddy in the pool. So at that point, I saw them struggling in the eddy, and I dove back into the water, and they were pretty close, so I was right there with them. Lou was also right there in the water with me, and we kind of grabbed Evan from Pete, who was also super shaken up. I don't know if he had any downtime as well. But we grabbed Evan, rolled him over because he was face down, and it was obvious right away that he was limp. He was kind of blue-gray, no sign of a respiratory effort, and started swimming down the eddy and shouting for other people on the shelf to throw us a rope to pull us back. So they threw us a rope, which I grabbed, and the 2 of us kind of had Evan, and they pulled us over to this shelf. As soon as we got to the shelf, my first thought was, okay, how are we going to get CPR going? And I knew we had to take the life jacket off. So we pulled him half out of the water, so his upper body was on this kind of slightly slanted rock shelf. We were trying to loosen the life jacket. And, there's hands everywhere, and we're kind of fumbling. And the life jacket at this point is like already kind of up over his face from pulling him up onto the shelf. And as they continued to try to pull it up over his head, I was like, I'm going to start compressions, because that's the only thing I could think to do in the moment to kind of get that process rolling, since there were several of us trying to get the life jacket off and he wasn't in a good position. So I just start pumping. Luke quickly gets out their knife and slices the side. So that came off. I'm pumping, and pretty quickly Luke's like, all right, give me 30. Tell me when you're at 30. Said, okay, 30. When I got there, and they performed the first couple rescue breaths. We also pulled Evan up a little bit more onto the shelf. It was chaos.
Also on scene and providing an essential role in the resuscitation efforts was Lou Kronzer.
So we're starting to go into CPR, and so are trying to get his PFD off so we can do compressions on his chest. And I'm kind of fumbling with it, and another person is kind of fumbling with it, and you can tell we're getting flustered and trying to get this jacket off, and it's just taking so long. And so I say, like, all right, I'm cutting it, and I just get my knife out and cut it off really quick, and so we can slip it off his shoulder. And he just had a astral green jacket, so it was really easy just to pretty much in like one sweep clean it up and get it off of him. But yeah, so then Carl started going at compressions, and I was right there, and I was like, all right, well, let me know when you get to 30, and I'm going to do some rescue breaths. Carl gets to about 30 compressions, and I'm like, all right, and I go and do my 2 rescue breaths, and I don't get any chest rise with the breaths at all, and you could just tell they didn't really land. And I was trying to tilt his head back to open up the airway, but unfortunately, Evan's not responsive, and his jaw is locked, and his head is stiff, and he's not with us. And so I had to stick my fingers in his mouth and pry open his jaw, and then tilt his head back to like really open up the airway. And, Carl, while I'm doing this, Carl is still running chest compressions and, then I get 2 breaths and you can see some rise. And then we do another rotation. I get 2 breaths and you can see some rise. And then Carl and I switch and I do a round of compressions. And Carl does 2 breaths and then Evan slowly starts like blink. Carl and I have talked, and I think it was about 2 minutes and 45 seconds of us starting compressions to getting a response from Evan. He was still struggling. He was very we're just eyes are barely open and twitching, kind of like starting to spit some stuff up, some fluid, some water, some mucus and stuff is starting to come up. So he is breathing on his own, but he's struggling, but it just like, we're not doing anything. He's started to come back like fairly quickly. It's pretty impressive how he started to notice where he was at and everything. And just quite fast. Like we were, checking his pupils and they all were all dilating regularly. And he's like, we're having fully coherent conversation within 4 minutes of his eyes opening up, or less than 4 minutes probably.
One of the things I find most valuable in these stories is hearing about the real-world problem solving that has to happen during a resuscitation. Things like figuring out a secure spot to start delivering CPR, opening the airway, or removing barriers to effective chest compressions all can't exactly be taught in a CPR course. In our prior resuscitation story from the Halasinko River in episodes 2 and 3 of this podcast, we heard about the issue with a tight neck gasket compromising the rescue breath attempts. In this episode, we hear about the problem of a PFD that needed to be cut out of the way to allow access to the airway and to the chest. I now carry a pair of trauma shears in my PFD since hearing about these types of situations. They're a cheap and very effective tool, and safer to use than a knife in these chaotic scenarios. As I mentioned earlier in the beginning of this episode, the American Heart Association has updated some of the guidelines regarding CPR for drowning. Drowning is a fundamentally different process than a typical cardiac arrest that you might encounter in an older patient with heart disease. In most cases of cardiac arrest from heart disease, the primary issue is lack of circulating blood due to poor heart function, either from an arrhythmia or from a heart attack and weakened pump function of the heart muscle. So in those cases, compression-only CPR and AED use are usually the main interventions needed in the first few minutes of an arrest to help circulate blood and to restore the normal heart rhythm. In the first few minutes of a drowning, the primary problem is lack of oxygen in the blood, so rescue breathing is the first priority. Heart function may also be impaired because of the low oxygen, so chest compressions are usually necessary too. But restoring oxygen delivery through rescue breathing should be prioritized and should be started as soon as possible without delays. Let's get back to hear how Evan was feeling as he came around.
The first 20 minutes, I was pretty out of it. I was like puking, spitting up water, puking up, river water, everything in my stomach, kind of just laying on the side. I mean, there was no energy, shivering. I was pretty dang cold. Everybody kind of, pulled out what they had. I mean, I had gloves on, I had a hat, a puffy jacket. It was pretty sweet. But yeah, the first 20 minutes I was laying there just like sick as a dog, like almost like you just, got hit by the worst flu ever and you just didn't want to move. But then, I don't know, after 15, 20 minutes, it kind of like, honestly, after, everybody made the plan to hike out and get on out of there, it was like, you're going to have to move. It kind of flipped the switch and something, adrenaline kicked in. And I was like, all right, let's do it. And stood up, still a little dizzy and stuff, but I was walking with help, but I was, walking across logs, making it happen. And like from waking up, the 20 minutes of hell, like not feeling good. And then from that point on, I was just like on the rise. I was feeling better and better every minute.
While Evan's resuscitation was ongoing, word was passed through the gorge of the incident and reached the race organization crew downstream at Gorilla. As we heard earlier from Robbie Gilson, he started back upstream towards the scene of the accident and arrived shortly after Evan awoke.
So the role that I kind of took on, because the guys who were the folks who were with him at the time had saved his life and had done that, and so at that point, everything on my end was about maintenance and then correspondence with people out of the gorge and with EMS personnel. I was fortunate enough to have a radio on me, so I was able to keep communications going with the crew that was already there and communicate with the live stream crew and EMS who were all out of the gorge. So I essentially, with the radio, became the incident commander of the situation. I was able to relay, where we were intending to get picked up by EMS. My job was to make sure that Evan was getting exactly what he needed, and that we were keeping his heart rate down, and was trying to get as many people on board as I could to hike up out of there to meet EMS personnel. I saw my role as like, I want all hands on deck to be there if for some reason he starts to go down in condition. And I wanted to have enough bodies going up the hill with us just to ensure that if he needed to be fully carried out, that we could make that happen. I had a couple extra layers. I had gloves and like a beanie. And so he was able to get that sort of warmth that you need after having something like a lot of exposure to cold water. And so he was able to he was warm enough. And, we also had plenty of food and water on the way up. And it was all about making sure his needs were getting met and that we had communication between him and also the guys who had been with him the entirety of the rescue, and making sure that they weren't feeling overexerted and that they were getting a break. The biggest thing was he was able to walk on his own. He was able to ambulate. And so that was really the biggest thing. At first we had him just two people shouldering him over and assisting, and as he moved, he seemed to be doing really well. I think his adrenaline was still going, but he was hiking up that hill as fast as me. I wanted to take a break up the hill for myself. I was kind of asking him if he wanted to take a break. I wanted a break for myself. It's pretty steep up there.
So once I got to the hospital, it was like an hour in. Once I got to the hospital, that's when it started going downhill. I was like getting sick, puking, I don't even know what I was throwing up, but couldn't stop throwing up. Couldn't, super nauseous. Couldn't eat or drink anything. Kind of described it as like a really, really bad hangover, just getting flu, just like shaken, just out of it completely. That probably went from the incident happened like right at 11 a.m. I think. So looking at the time, I think from like 2:00 till about the next morning, I was like kind of like that, like couldn't eat or drink anything, just getting sick. That was pretty miserable. But then, so they did blood tests pretty quickly on me. And the next day they realized that my kidneys were the main thing messed up. So it's like acute kidney syndrome from no blood being rushed to those organs, or they're like the first things to go after having to be resuscitated. So that was the main thing on their concern, were my kidneys. And then my white blood cell count was pretty high. So they did some, lung x-rays to make sure I didn't have like fluid in there, or so something that could get infected. And then, so that was the two main things they were looking out for, was infection and my kidneys. So kidneys, there's not really much you can do other than just drinking water, staying hydrated. And then my white blood cell, they started pumping me with antibiotics.
Evan went on to make a quick and full recovery and was able to record the interview here shortly after leaving the hospital. He was very thankful to the crew that saved his life, those that we heard from here and a few others that I didn't get a chance to interview. It was truly a team effort.
I don't know. I just got to say, thank you. These are the people that saved my life. Carl Anderson, Amy Lou Kronzer, Pete Frazier, and J.R. Wall. Those are the four people that, were directly in that setup, that rescued me and did the CPR. So I don't think, without one of those four, it could have been very different. They all did something of their own. And then for, Charles Brooks, also the other guy out there who's kayaking with me. He helped. And then Robbie Gilson was, one of the guys that came down. He kind of, set up. He was kind of like, once it was stable and stuff, he kind of led getting me out of there. So all those guys and Emmy Lou, they're, I owe you a lot, and thank you. Thank you for everything you did.
A rescue and resuscitation like this does not happen with just sheer luck. And for each of those that I interviewed, I asked about their prior experience and training. Here's what they had to say.
So my name is Pete Frazier. Grew up in Roswell, Georgia, and when I was 19 years old, I moved out west to Montana, and that's when I really got into paddling. In my whitewater career, I've taken 3 swiftwater rescue classes. My most recent being in, I guess it was April or May this spring, so 2023. Did that. I also have my wilderness first responder. I've taken multiple CPR and first aid classes. So I'm a kayak instructor in the summers, and so we're just taking, for the most part, beginners down class 2, maybe like class 3 rapid here and there if they want to do it. But so just like but they swim all the time, and so it's like you see these minor rescue situations. It's not even like a true rescue situation in one sense, but it's like just knowing how to react and such, like react quickly. And you can kind of, if you have like the tools and you've used them enough, you can almost imply one tool while you're consciously thinking about what your next plan might be, you know? Like, obviously I see it and it's like, okay, like I'm not thinking like, what am I going to do when I get up to him pinned? I'm like thinking, I got to start moving up there, like scurrying around, and as I'm thinking what to do, and then I'm throwing my rope. But even as I'm throwing my rope, hoping that works, I'm immediately consciously thinking about what the next plan is.
My name's Carl Anderson. I have been whitewater kayaking for maybe 7 or 8 years. Yeah, I live in Colorado. I've been working seasonally as a ski patroller, and I just finished a second degree nursing program, so I'm studying for boards there, and I'm an EMT and work a little bit in the local hospital as an ER tech. So that's kind of my background there. Prior to the EMT, I had done woofer, and then obviously with ski patrol, you know, the emphasis is on kind of outdoor rescue situations. I will say, so having some experience with that obviously was super helpful, but I will say that even in that context, there is still a framework and resources and protocols that you're operating within. And when you're on the river with your friends, you're truly alone. You don't have a radio necessarily. You don't have protocols for like, oh, this is the type of call I'm going to make, and I know what resources should be coming, you know? So that was definitely a lot to handle in the moment.
I'm Emmy Lou Kronzer, or Lou Kronzer, from North Carolina. I've done a lot of swiftwater rescue training, like professional level courses and stuff like that with multiple different companies like Knowles and Landmark and Sierra Rescue out on the West Coast. And so I've been fortunate enough to do a lot of that, as well as was an EMT for a few years, and am now currently a wilderness first responder. So I keep that certification up. Don't still hold my EMT, but was for a while. I had just gotten my CPR cert done in August, redone. So I was like fresh with it, ready to go. And usually it's a 2-year cert, but I think I'm going to start doing mine every year. You know, it takes 2 hours out of your day. And they do give a lot of updates, actually. Like, surprisingly, it's not like something that doesn't change. Like, the CPR updates change all the time as we learn more and more how to best care for people with cardiac problems. So, yeah, regularly redoing certifications.
My name is Robbie Gilson. I have been a lover of moving water for my whole life. I've been whitewater kayaking for about 17 years. I have experience through Knowles Wilderness Medicine Institute of both a woofer training and wilderness EMT. And I have worked in non-emergent and hospital and 911 setting as an EMT.
In talking to those that have been through this type of situation, one of the most fascinating things to me is to hear about the experience of the event and those unconscious moments while they're teetering on the brink between life and death. Here's how it went for Evan.
There was a time where I was like, could think. Like I was definitely like dreaming. It was almost like a sleep paralysis kind of like something, like my mind was running, but I just couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't talk. I was honestly, to be straight up with you, I was like dreaming about, I was a fish underwater, and I was like swimming around. I will remember that. I was swimming around, fish, and then like just hanging out. But I was like, Evan, what's going on in your head right now? And then I woke up and came to it, looked at them, and I mean, there was 10, 15 people probably on the river right bank staring at me, with me on the side, just laying there. And the faces, I'll always remember the faces. I mean, they're about to cry, I think. There was so much joy, that I just woke up. And it was cool. You know, seeing somebody doing mouth to mouth on me in CPR, I don't even know who you are. So that's a pretty cool thing about kayaking. It's like, you don't even know who people are, and they'll like risk their lives to save yours.
Thanks again for listening to The Safety Break. And thanks to Evan and all of the amazing people involved in his rescue for contributing to this episode. I hope you learned something valuable from the story. And mostly I hope that it inspires you to go out and get the training you need to become more proficient in these skills. CPR training is a great place to start, followed by swiftwater rescue and wilderness first responder courses. I hope to see you on the river. Here's Robbie Gilson again with the last word.
For everything to transpire the way that it did, I mean, it's like he had multiple things going in the right direction. You know, he had Carl, who's an EMT back in a hospital in Colorado, and ski patrol. Lou, who has wilderness first aid and CPR knowledge. He had Pete, who was already out of his kayak, having just broken his paddle at go left, and was able to like quickly run up and get on a live bait to be the one to get hands on. I mean, for all of those variables to go in at the same time, I feel an immense amount of pride for being part of this community of so many competent people who have done their work to make sure they know how to respond and act when it's time. Because when it is time, it's a matter of seconds, not minutes.
Thank you for listening to The Safety Break, the Whitewater Rescue Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button and click follow on our Facebook page so we know that you're out there. I'm also looking for more stories. If you know of an interesting non-fatal river accident or rescue, send me a few details by email, safetybreak@gmail.com. It doesn't have to be dramatic or life-threatening, just something that we all might be able to learn from. I'll see if we can turn it into an episode. Stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the river.